Anonime. Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cobbs Corner. If this is your first time listening, welcome, and to my returning listeners, welcome back. On this episode of Cobbs Corner, we will be reviewing the 1942 classic Casablanca. We're going to be continuing our AFI's top 100 movies series. The top 100 greatest movies of all time, 100 greatest American films of all time, and number 3 on our list is Casablanca. We will be reviewing Godfather, and The Godfather is ranked as number 2. We'll be reviewing The Godfather at a later time, after I've read the book. So Casablanca, 1942. Quick introduction. A cynical expatriate American cafe owner struggles to decide whether or not to help his former lover and her fugitive husband escape the Nazis in French Morocco. Storyline. The story of Rick Blaine, a cynical, world-weary expatriate who runs a nightclub in Casablanca, Morocco during the early stages of World War II. Despite the pressure he constantly receives from the local authorities, Rick's Cafe has been a kind of haven for refugees seeking to obtain illicit letters that will help them escape to America. But when Ilsa, a former lover of Rick's, and her husband show up to his cafe one day, Rick faces a tough challenge which will bring up unforeseen complications, heartbreak, and ultimately an excruciating decision to make. This storyline is provided to us by Kyle Perez via IMDb. The movie is directed by Michael Cirtiz, written by Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch, and it stars Hubert Humphrey, Ingrid Bergman, and Paul Henried. Let's go to Cobbs Corner. So before I just dive head first into my favorite parts of this movie, just a bit of historical context. This movie came out in the year 1942, and it takes place in the year 1941, after the start of World War II. So let's just take a step back and understand the world in which this movie Casablanca was released in. Released in 1942, took place 1941, before Pearl Harbor, when America was a isolationist country. We were sort of neutral. Technically, we were still neutral in World War II. The whole, Hitler had invaded Poland in 1939, and the war was going on. There was the Marco Polo Bridge incident, I think in 1937, when Japan invaded China. Imperial Japan had invaded China, and the war was going on in Europe, but America, we were still isolated. We were not directly involved in World War II at this point. So, yeah, just a bit of context to the movie before we just dive in. A bit of historical context. The movie begins with, unlike Citizen Kane, which was our last episode, I mentioned how Citizen Kane, in the trivia, we talked about how it wasn't the norm at the time to just flash the movie title and then for the movie to just start right away without any opening credits. This movie puts all of its credits at the beginning of the movie and no credits at the end. So the movie starts off with the title, Casablanca, along with the opening credits, who's starring and the producers, directors, etc. And then we get a bit of a documentary style, sort of like newsreel, about how about how France has been occupied by the Nazis, and there's a network of refugees seeking safe passage to the Americas, to the United States, to Canada, to seeking safe passage to the Americas, which again, America, we were not directly involved yet. We were a neutral country. The seeking safe passage from Paris to eventually end up in Marseille, and then to Casablanca, Morocco. Now, Morocco was occupied by the French at that time, and our story officially begins at Rick's Cafe. Rick's Cafe, Rick, who's played by Humphrey Bogart. I almost said Hubert Humphrey. No, Humphrey Bogart, yes, played Rick Blaine, played by Humphrey Bogart. Rick Blaine, he's, as I said in the storyline, he's a cynical, world-weary expatriate. He runs a nightclub in Casablanca, which is sort of a haven that people are able to get transfer papers to go to Lisbon, to get on a plane to Lisbon, and then from Lisbon they take a clipper boat to the States. And at this point, the Nazis have occupied France, so there's a German presence in Morocco, but we see how it's really, this nightclub is kind of a haven for sort of both sides, I guess, of like the world conflict. Like the world was really at a tipping point, because as I said before, like America was not a part of the war yet. We were cautiously isolationist. The war could have gone either way at that point. And so we see how Rick's Cafe is, a haven for people getting transfer papers to Lisbon and to the Americas, and then all of a sudden one day, Ilsa, who is a former lover of Rick's, Ilsa played by Ingrid Bergman, she walks into Rick's Cafe one day, and she finds Rick, and she asks Rick to, and she tries to like rekindle whatever romance they might have had. And we even cut to pre-occupation of France, how Rick and Ilsa had met in France. Unbeknownst to Rick, Isla was married to, gosh, what was his name? She was married to Victor Laszlo. Victor Laszlo, who was a French freedom fighter who had been sent to a Nazi concentration camp, and he had been there for a year. So Isla's having this secret romance upon realization that, well, the news had come out that Victor Laszlo had been murdered, that he had been murdered in the concentration camp. And so then Isla and Rick are off in Paris, and they're just kind of living their life and falling in love. Unbeknownst to Rick, that Isla was still technically married to Mr. Laszlo, and then their love is pretty much, or their peaceful time in France, in Paris, in the city of love, is cut short by the Nazis invading, by the Nazi invasion of France. So their own like personal love is pretty much ended by like the crazy world that they were living, due to outside factors, and ultimately Rick devises this whole plan to for the two of them to leave Paris and to make their way to Casablanca, or to make their way to Casablanca as refugees, to pretty much make their way out of Nazi-occupied France. And then the plan is for Rick to pick Isla up at her hotel 4:45, and then get on the 5 o'clock train out of Paris. But then Isla ends up essentially leaving Rick behind, and as we see Rick along with his piano player Sam, played by Dooley Wilson, we see the two of them at the train station, and Sam hands Rick a letter, and it's a letter from Isla telling him to essentially move on and forget about her, and her pretty much saying it's not going to work out between us. You need to go and move on and live your life. I'm holding you back, sort of thing. So Rick and Sam, they make their way out of Paris, and they make their way over to Casablanca. And again, they open up this nightclub, Rick's, and now we're sort of all caught up with with where the story is at this time. And 2 German officials have been murdered by a Mr. Ugarte, and Mr. Ugarte, who is I guess one of the other French freedom fighters, who ends up getting arrested and then killed by German officials at Rick's bar. And we see how the movie, there's a lot of melodrama, there's a lot of seemingly minor stuff that goes on in this bar. And again, it's a haven for folks just trying to get out of Casablanca and make their way to the States. And then one night at the bar, we see Rick as he says, now I'm sure, you see, this is why this movie is so iconic and so timeless and such a great film, because you've heard quotes, all right? And I know this because when I first watched this movie, all right, I had already heard quotes from this movie. Again, I didn't understand the full context because I hadn't actually watched the full movie, but I've heard quotes from this movie. That have been used in other TV shows and other movies, and just references to Casablanca. So he says the iconic line as he's sitting at the bar: "Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine." So Rick's way of saying that he's kind of shocked that she, just walks into his bar, and how Rick has gone from pretty much being an idealist during his little romance with Isla pre-Nazi occupation of France, when everything was peaceful, and then the world pretty much tore them apart due to reasons beyond their control. They were torn apart. So he's gone from idealist to more of a cynic who just wants to stay out of the conflict, who wants to remain neutral, who wants to just run his nightclub and not get into politics. He's even had, there's even a scene where he has to break up, I think it's an argument between a French official and a German, and he says, you need to take your politics out of here. We don't get involved in the politics or whatever's going on in the world. This is my nightclub, and yes, there's some gambling, and this is a peaceful establishment. We are not involved in whatever everything else that's going on in the world, which reflects the state, which again reflects America's stance at this point in time in the global conflict. Rick is introduced to Victor Laszlo, because now it's confirmed that Victor Laszlo is still alive, and Isla, she admits to Rick that she was still married to Mr. Laszlo the whole time that the two of them were together in Paris. And now Isla knows that Mr. Laszlo is still alive, and she begs Rick to grant them safe passage to America, grant them safe passage out of Casablanca so they can, so Victor Laszlo, who again, French freedom fighter, can go and rejoin the fight They urge Rick to come out of pretty much his state of cynicism and of neutrality and to, join the fight. And then, Rick says no, and there's a really great scene where, Isla and Rick, they're in, I guess, Rick's his house or his bedroom, and then Isla says, you were our last hope, and there is no hope for Victor and I to make it out of here alive. You were our last hope. So one of Rick's associates is Captain Louis Renault, played by Claude Rains. Captain Renault is an opportunist who really, who really only looks out for himself and not for others, and just, again, he's an opportunist who just kind of goes with the winning team regardless. And he's ultimately the one who helps get Isla and Victor out of Casablanca. There's probably my favorite scene in the bar is where there's German officials and shout out to my listeners in Germany and my listeners in France, any of my listeners in Morocco, any of my listeners in Morocco and North Africa, shout out to all of you. Salute. Granted, my German and my French is not as good as it once was. I did take French in high school, middle school and high school. I've never taken a German class. There's some song that the German officials in the bar, they start singing some German song, and then the band, and then Victor Laszlo, he tells the band to play whatever the French Liberty song that he tells them to play, and then Rick even approves it. So we start to see Rick slowly come out of his state of cynical neutrality and just wanting to stay out of everything. And the band starts playing, and then all the French people in the bar, they join in, they start singing loudly and with passion, and then they start singing loudly and with passion, and then the Germans, they try singing their song, and it's sort of like a singing match, and then that the French ultimately win. Isla joins in, and she says, Vive la France, vive liberté, vive le démocratique, or I know Vive la France means long live France, and Vive la Liberté, long live liberty, I think. So again, French-speaking listeners, feel free to translate for us English speakers in the comments below. Yes, Vive la France, Vive Liberté, and ultimately this gets Rick's club shut down. We see how you see both sides of the conflict in neutral territory, and then they end up having to shut down Rick's nightclub. Rick, along with Captain Renault, are able to get two transfer papers for Victor and Isla to get them out of Casablanca and onto the United States. And we even see there was a younger couple. We even see that there was a younger couple that Rick was able to help get transfer papers after Rick told the husband to bet on number 22, bet on black 22, and then he wins this huge fortune, and Rick is able to kind of slide him the transfer papers and gets him and his wife out of Casablanca and on the next plane to Lisbon. It's the same couple. It's a minor couple that we saw in the opening of the movie. They said we could be on that plane tomorrow. So yeah. The movie ends with, again, another quotable scene that I've heard, that I've seen parodies of, that you've heard these lines, or you've maybe seen this exact scene one point or another. Isla wants Rick to join her and Victor as they escape to Lisbon. Although Rick finally realizes that he has to set aside whatever romance he might have had with Isla and Victor. He says how, like, something like, our love in this world, like in this crazy world, our love amounts to not even a anthill or a hill of beans or something like that. That quote might come up later on in the episode during the quotes portion. Essentially saying that the lives of, like, him and her, lives of two people cannot stand in the way of how many millions of lives are at stake with, this global conflict that's going on. Basically saying, like, there's more important things than true love, that true love is going to have to lose to this larger conflict. You've got a role to play, your husband has a role to play, and I've got a role to play in this global conflict. Rick has grown from this cynical isolationist to now this sort of idealistic freedom fighter. He's putting himself back in the narrative, so to speak. Again, another Hamilton reference. And maybe I'll work one into all 100 of these movies, who knows. Stay tuned. And Rick, he tells Isla straight. He says, it's like, if that plane leaves and you're not on it, you'll regret it. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but for the rest of your life, you will. Or if, like, that plane leaves and I'm on it and you're not on it, then you won't regret it immediately, but eventually you will. And Isla says, like, we'll always have that time in Paris. The movie ends with Victor and Elsa fly off in their plane, and Rick ends up killing one of the German captains that was about to alert the radio tower that they were trying to escape. So the very last line of the movie is between Rick and Captain Renault, as Captain Renault tells Rick, "It seems like the beginning of a beautiful friendship." So this movie explores the themes of conflict and, I would say, true love to an extent. Like true love and also like larger conflicts and being able to see the bigger picture and accepting the fact that maybe due to reasons beyond your control, you can't always get what you want out of life. Life is not going to go the way that you want it to. And you're going to have to eventually let go of certain things to serve the greater good, to serve your greater purpose. Rick had to accept the fact that he and Ilsa were never going to work out, that it would never work, because he realizes that he has work to do. He has work to do in defeating the Nazis, in defeating the Nazis. He's got a job to do in Morocco, in Casablanca. That's where his story is. That's where his life is. And Isla and Mr. Laszlo, their fight is out there. Their fight is out there in Europe, in the United States. That's their fight. That's where their story. That's where their story is. That's where their place is. And whatever true love that Rick and Ilsa might have had is just not going to work in a world that's on fire. So I think that the main theme, the main moral of the story is you must be willing to let go of that which you love at times. Doesn't even have to be like true love. Doesn't even have to be like that big. Your ability to maybe compromise and let go of certain things to serve a greater purpose, to serve your higher calling. Now, this movie, Warner Bros. Had rushed out the December 1942 release of this movie so it could align with the Allied invasion of North Africa just weeks earlier. And Rick reflects the eventual joining the fight of the United States. Rick goes from a cynical isolationist, a cynical, pretty much businessman who just doesn't want to get involved in the war or in politics or nothing. Just wants to live a quiet life, just wants to run away from the fight, wants to stay out of the fight as long as possible, to then being forced back into it, to then realizing that I have to join this fight. I have no choice. It is my duty. And that reflects the United States. You started out as isolationists, especially after World War I. You wanted to it's like, we don't want to go charging into another one of Europe's wars. It's like, this Second World War, we will remain neutral. We will not get directly involved. But eventually, after Pearl Harbor, we eventually got involved. We eventually realized that we have a part to play. We have a role to play in this conflict. We saw our higher purpose beyond just our own, domestic, national, interests. So yeah, that's the main theme. And I'd argue it's a very timeless theme, and that's why this movie is on this list. The very timeless theme of knowing of seeing the bigger picture and being able to let some things go, make sacrifices for the greater good, to serve your higher calling, whatever it may be. So that is the main theme of Casablanca.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then I'm gonna feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted and I'm leaving. I'ma take what's mine with the webs I'm weaving. I could take this crowd from seeing to believing. Got a taste for blood and my tongue keeps bleeding.
So now for Casablanca Plus. All of this information is provided to us by IMDb. Awards. Casablanca won the Oscar for Best Picture in 1944. Humphrey Bogart was nominated for Best Actor in a Leading Role at the 1944 Oscars. Claude Rains was nominated for Best Actor in a Supporting Role. And Michael Cirtiz won Best Director. He won the Oscar for Best Director in 1944. Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch won the Oscar for Best Writing of a Screenplay in 1944. Author Edison was nominated for the Oscar for Best Cinematography in Black and White. Owen Marks was nominated for the 1944 Oscar for Best Film Editing. And Max Steiner was nominated for the Oscar for Best Music and Scoring of a Dramatic or Comedy Picture. On to the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films, USA. In 2009, Casablanca was nominated for the Saturn Award for Best DVD Classic Film Released for the Ultimate Collector's Edition of Casablanca, released back in 2009. So let's see, that must have been the 67th anniversary, I guess, 2009, yeah, 67 years. Yep. Las Vegas Film Critics Society Awards. In 2008, Casablanca won the Sierra Award for Best DVD, Packaging, Design, and Content for the 85th Anniversary Edition, Warner Home Entertainment. 85th Anniversary. The 85th. That might be wrong. I think they might have meant to say 65th anniversary. I think that's a typo. The movie's only 81 years old. So yeah, it's probably 65th anniversary. Yeah. National Board Review, USA. Casablanca won the NBR Award for Top 10 Films. And 1943, Michael Cirtiz won the NBR Award for Best Director. He shared this award with This Is the Army. National Film Preservation Board, USA. Casablanca won the National Film Registry in 1989. New York Film Critics Circle Awards. Hubert Humphrey was nominated for the NYFCC Award for Best Actor. He shared this award with Across the Pacific. Michael Cirtiz was nominated for the NYFCC Award for Best Director, shared with Yankee Doodle Dandy. The Photoplay Awards. Casablanca was nominated for the Gold Medal, for the 1978 nominee for the Gold Medal for the Hall of Fame movie at the Photoplay Awards. Paul Henried, Ingrid Bergman, Humphrey Bogart, and Claude Rains won the Photoplay Award for Best Performance of the Month in February, back in 1943. Golden Trailer Awards. This was actually recently, just this year. Casablanca won the Golden Trailer Award for Best Digital Drama, 80th Anniversary 4K Trailer. Okay, yep, 80 years. DVD Exclusive Awards, 2003. Kristen Crichton and Beth Welts were nominated for the DVD X Award for Best Overall DVD Classic Movie, including all extra features, for the 60th Anniversary Special Edition back in 2003. The OFDA's, Online Film and Television Association. Max Steiner won the 2022 OFDA Film Hall of Fame for his score, or was inducted into the OFDA Hall of Fame for his score of Casablanca. And Ingrid Bergman won the OFTA Film Hall of Fame for the character of Isla Lund in Casablanca. Humphrey Bogart won the 2022 OFTA Film Hall of Fame for character as Rick Blaine. And then 2021, the song As Time Goes By won the 2021 OFTA Film Hall of Fame for a song. 1997, Casablanca won the OFTA Film Hall of Fame for motion picture. On to some trivia. Many of the actors who played the Nazis were in fact German Jews who had escaped from Nazi Germany. Wow, okay. So it's a way of, sort of a way of like de-powering the Nazis in a way, kind of. Sort of like how like Mel Brooks, who, is also Jewish, he's said how in a lot of his works he's portrayed Hitler in a comedic way. He's portrayed Nazis in like a comedic way, and that's a way of taking power away from the Nazis, sort of thing. So like many of the actors who played Nazis in Casablanca were actually German Jews who had escaped from Nazi Germany. So it's a way of kind of turning the I forget the phrase. Way of kind of switching the narrative, I guess. At around an hour and 12 minutes, during the scene in which Marseille, I think I pronounced that. Again, French-speaking listeners, please feel free to correct my pronunciations, is sung over the German song Die Wacht am Rhein, The Watch on the Rhine. Don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Many of the extras had real tears in their eyes, as a large number were actual refugees from Nazi persecution in Germany and elsewhere in Europe, and were overcome by the emotions the scene brought out. The scene was copied from Jean Riour's The Grand Illusion in 1937, in which French soldiers in a German POW camp sing the song as a similar gesture of defiance. In that film, the song was led by a prisoner who was in drag for a show the prisoners were putting on. The song was written in 1792 by Claude Joseph Rouget de Lys in Strasbourg after the declaration of war by France against Austria, and was originally titled Chant de guerre pour l'armée du Rhin, the war song for the Rhine Army. Wow, okay, so it's a little, again, it's kind of, at times this movie is a bit time period specific. I get that the movie did come out in 1942, but with everything that was going on at that time in the world, and then everything going on in the world, like this movie, so production was probably around 1941 maybe, so it takes place in 1941, so yeah, it makes sense that a lot of the extras would be overcome with the emotion, and then it just worked for the context of the scene and then everything going on in the world at that time. It's one of those times where I guess the lines between reality and fiction are kind of blurred, and it works. Rick's Cafe was one of the few original sets built for the film. The rest were all recycled from other Warner Bros. Productions due to wartime restrictions on building supplies. World War II was a very, very different time. There were a lot of restrictions. There was a rationing of food, and there was, even though we hadn't officially joined the war effort yet, well, I think especially after we joined the war effort, there was a lot of restrictions on the American economy. Plus at that time we were going through our Great Depression, followed by the New Deal. But yeah, it makes sense that Rick's Cafe was one of the few original sets built, because filmmaking was expensive back then. again, we take for granted there's all this, CGI and visual effects. It's like there was none of that 80 years ago. So yeah, I mean, it was expensive. So it makes sense. They were all recycled from other Warner Bros. Productions. I'm sure this is not the only movie on this list that's had recycled set pieces. No. Reduce, reuse, recycle, folks. Because the film was made during World War II, the production was not allowed to film at an airport after dark for security reasons. Instead, it used a soundstage with a small cardboard cutout airplane and forced perspective. To give the illusion that the plane was full-size, they used little people to portray the crew preparing the plane for takeoff. Years later, the same technique was used in Alien, 1979, in the scene where the crew discovers the dead space jockey with director Ridley Scott's son and some of his friends in scaled-down spacesuits. Again, going back to our previous bit of trivia, it's like ingenuity. It was that inconvenience that forced, that forced ingenuity, that forced that intellect of filmmaking. And whether if it was the economic restrictions or filming restrictions due to the film literally being made during a world war. So yeah, that just goes to show the lengths that's dedication, that's determination, that is dedication to a film, saying we're going to have this movie, it's going to get made one way or another. We are committed. We're not just going to not have a plane takeoff scene or completely abandon, or completely rewrite the script because of shooting regulations. So salute to, the directors and the producers who, worked on Casablanca, although I'm sure most of you are no longer with us, but, in spirit, hence why 80 years later this movie's being reviewed. It is never revealed why Rick cannot return to America. Julius J. Epstein later said that my brother, Philip G. Epstein, and I tried very hard to come up with a reason why Rick couldn't return to America, but nothing seemed right. We finally decided not to give a reason at all. That is true. They never truly gave a definitive reason why Rick couldn't return to the States. So they kind of just left that as a mystery, and yeah, certain things, maybe you have like a bit of a writer's block. It's like we couldn't come up with like a legitimate reason for why, like one specific reason why Rick can't return to the States. So we'll just kind of leave it up to the viewer's imagination. And that's exactly what they did, and it worked. On to some goofs. Continuity. When Rick turns around on the quay, to get on the train after rain was seen drenching his fedora and coat, both his and Sam's hat and coat are then completely dry at around 47 minutes. I feel like I did notice that. Yep, they're getting drenched, but once they get on the train, they're completely dry. Yep, movie magic. I feel like that's in a lot of movies. I feel like that's like a common thing in movies. It's like you just downpouring and you just get drenched, but then in the next shot, boom, we're dry. At around 16 minutes, while chatting to Captain Renault outside the Café Américain, Rick lights a cigarette, then in the next shot, lights another. I might have picked up on that, yeah. At around 11 minutes, right before showing Rick the letters of transit, Ugarte begins lighting a new cigarette with his previous cigarette, but gives up doing so and puts the unlit cigarette on the ashtray in front of him, where it rests partially on the table. Again, eagle-eyed viewers, gotta love them. Moments later, there are two cigarettes in the ashtray, none of which are resting on the table. Moments later, as Ugarte leaves the table, the cigarettes have disappeared from the ashtray. Off into oblivion. Off into movie magic land. Early on in this movie, Sam has his piano facing toward the band. A few moments later, the piano faces away from the band. I kind of picked up on that. Yeah, kind of picked up on that. Yeah, the piano's not facing the band. Yeah. No. At around an hour and 40 minutes at the airport, the epaulets on Major Strasser's coat disappear and reappear between shots. Nice. Nice bit of a gaps in continuity. On to some factual errors. There was never any such thing as a letter of transit. Wow. Never. So apparently that wasn't a thing in real life, and that was just something created for the movie. At around 43 minutes, during the flashback scene in Paris, loudspeaker trucks are shown with the Gestapo telling the Parisians not to act when the Germans arrive tomorrow. In fact, Paris issued no warnings about the German advance at all. The German blitzkrieg overwhelmed the French so completely that all communications were either stymied or went astray. Makes sense. They were caught by surprise. At the start of the final airport scene, the weather report that is telephoned to the radio tower visibility is quoted as being 1.5 miles. Light fog, but if the visibility is 1.5 miles, then it is called haze rather than fog, and the weather report is missing some very important items such as wind direction, wind speed, and air pressure. Shout out to my meteorologist listening, and to the meteorologist who gave us this bit of trivia, this storm chaser air traffic control person who gave us this bit of trivia. You know who you are. Shout out to you, wherever you're listening from. At around 51 minutes, Captain Renault boasts that I was with them, the Americans, when they blundered into Berlin in 1918. The Great Wars, the World War I armistice, that which ceased hostilities, was effective November 1918, but it did not end the war. It did, however, reestablish the borders back to those at the moment just before the outbreak of war. In other words, the armistice caused the Germans to retreat from France, but never ceded any part of Germany to be occupied by foreign troops. Sometime later, almost 8 months, the peace was concluded among all but the Americans. The U.S. Congress rejected the Treaty of Versailles, and actually the USA didn't conclude a separate peace with Germany, the Central Powers, until the start of 1923, over 4 years later. While the U.S. may have maintained a handful of troops on the continent after the armistice, there is no record of them singularly or in concert with their allies ever marching through the streets of Berlin until 1945, that is. So yeah, apparently, like, the war had kind of already ended. Everybody was kind of cool, but then, you know, the USA, we said we need to maybe stay another 8 months and just, we reject the Treaty of Versailles. We need our own treaty because, you know, America, we got to have our own stuff, you know. Shout out to any veterans that are listening. You know, thank you for your service. At around 3 minutes, there is a French tricolor with crescent and star in the middle waving over the police offices at the beginning of the film. Such flag was never used in Morocco. During the time of the French Protectorate, the flag of Morocco was the same as today, red with a green pentagram in the middle. The civil ensign used between 1923 and 1956 added a small French tricolor in the canton, but never a crescent and star. All right, so that was a factual error on the part of the Epsteins, the directors, of course. Incorrectly regarded as goofs. At around 37 minutes, when Rick is getting drunk, he asks Sam, "It's December 1941 in Casablanca. What time is it in New York?" After Sam replies, "My watch stopped," he goes on to say, "I'll bet you they're asleep in New York. I'll bet you they're asleep all over America." However, Rick is not referring to the actual time, noted by giving a month and year rather than a time, and is actually making reference to, in pre-Pearl Harbor America, most Americans are asleep when it comes to the war and fighting the Axis powers. This is an intentional attempt at a poetic reference, not a statement of fact. Again, that's real-world context. That's the context in which the movie exists, in pre-Pearl Harbor America. So yes, most Americans are asleep. They are not at all involved in either side of the war, not involved in fighting the Axis, not involved in, joining the Allies, and, we're just sort of asleep, sort of just doing our own thing at this point. So yes, that was a intentional choice on behalf of the studio, on behalf of the directors. So it's nice. It was a nice sort of nod to the climate of the time. At around 51 minutes, Renault says, "We mustn't underestimate American blundering. I was with them when they blundered into Berlin in 1918. This isn't historically correct, but Louis was being sarcastic." So, yeah. Makes sense, Louis was being, sarcastic, a bit of sarcasm. At the very beginning, as we explained in our previous bit of trivia, at the very beginning, a turning globe reveals across the Soviet Union the words Union of Socialist Soviet Republics. Although it was not used as frequently as Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, it is an accepted translation of the name and occasionally appeared on maps of that era. Right, they did the USSR. I thought it was like Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the Soviet Union, Socialist Soviet Republics. But yeah, it makes sense. Certain translations, certain like direct translations, and I realize other languages, like they might put their words a bit, well, for us English speakers in America, might seem a bit backwards. Like I know in Spanish, it's like if you were to say the red shirt, you would say the direct translation would be the shirt red, or la camiseta rojo, the shirt red, when really it's the red shirt, but they will like kind of switch their words around a bit. So common mistranslation, if you will. At around 11 minutes, when Senor Ugarte is explaining to Rick about the letters of transit, he says they are signed by General Weygand, not the Free French leader, General Charles de Gaulle, as some people think. At the time the movie is set, 1942, General Maxime Weygand was the Vichy Delegate General of their North African colonies. All right, so yeah, nice bit of historical accuracy. That it was not Charles de Gaulle. It was not contrary to popular belief. It was not Charles de Gaulle. He was not the Delegate General of the North African colonies at that time. 1942. So, at around 28 minutes, Major Strasser addresses Ilsa as Mademoiselle, because as explained by Ilsa when she attempts to get her letters of transit from Rick, her marriage to Victor was kept secret even from her friends. Right, so it was a secret marriage that she had with Victor that she didn't really tell anyone about. So the assumption that she was a mademoiselle and not a madame, it's my understanding that mademoiselle is for any unmarried woman. You refer to her as mademoiselle, and then madame is for a married woman, for Mrs. It's like the English translation for madame would be Mrs., and then the English translation for mademoiselle is Miss. Miss, Ms. Unmarried. Mademoiselle. So MS instead of MRS. Revealing mistakes. At around an hour and 27 minutes after police break up underground groups meeting, and Laszlo escapes to Rick's cafe. Laszlo is trying to bandage his arm with a dish towel. The towel falls off several times, yet there is no blood on it. I kind of picked up on this one. Towel falls off several times. There's no blood on it. It's, definitely a mistake on the part of the props department or the makeup department. It was the 40s. Miscellaneous. At around 13 minutes, when Signor Ferrari first enters Rick's cafe and seats himself, the back stucco wall to the top and left of Ferrari's head vibrates a few times, exposing it as a very flimsy set wall. It occurs once more when it cuts back to the same shot after a cutaway of Rick. Wow. So back stucco wall to the top and left of Ferrari's head. It vibrates a few times. Okay, so yeah, very flimsy set wall. They had to work with what they had. Two actors have their names misspelled in the credits. S.Z. Sakal is spelled S.K. Sakal, and Madeleine LeBeau's name is miscredited as Madeleine LeBeau, but with a capital B instead of a lowercase b. Okay. Honest mistake, honest mistake. I think I actually picked up on that on IMDb, that the character, the SC Zalek, spelled SK instead of SC, yeah. Z or Z, if you're outside the United States. Audio-visual unsynchronized. At around an hour and 12 minutes, when the trumpet and trombone players raise their instruments to play La Marseillaise, the music begins a split second before they start playing. Kind of picked up on that. Yeah, kind of picked up on that, yeah. Unsynchronized audio. There are multiple instances throughout the film where the action of Sam's hands on the piano bears no resemblance to the piano part heard, especially notable in the first time Sam sings As Time Goes By for Ilsa. A rapid tremble run is executed that would have necessitated the movement of his right forearm. None is seen. This is very true. I don't play the piano. I used to play the alto saxophone. Music scholars, shout out to the, piano player, the music scholar that pointed out this bit of information to us. Shout out to you, wherever you're listening from. And piano players and musicians, feel free to confirm this. Feel free to confirm or deny this bit of information. My friend who's a singer from Troop 5 in Middlebury, Connecticut, you know who you are. I'm talking to you. Please confirm this for us. At around an hour and 1 minute, while accompanying Sam of If I Could Be With You, the guitarist pats her instrument in rhythm, yet the sound heard can only be made when the guitar is actually strummed. True. The guitarist pats her instrument in rhythm, and yet the sound heard can only be made when the guitar is actually strummed. Well, yeah, I mean, makes sense. You're not actually playing the instrument, so yeah. At around 15 minutes, when Yvonne is kicked out of Rick's in the first scene there, the comments she shouts as she walks outside don't match her lip movement at all. I may have noticed. I feel like I probably noticed that and just don't particularly remember that scene as well. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I picked up on that. Yeah. Throughout the movie, Sam is seen playing an upright piano, but the sound is clearly that of a grand piano. Again, to the musicians listening, I invite your feedback in the comments. Crew or equipment visible At around 5 minutes, when German plane approaches the airport, the camera pans across a large group of refugees with their passports lined up outside the police headquarters. The camera moves close to the crowd, revealing the individual persons. A shadow moves across the wall behind them, which is most likely the camera cane. Camera crane, English. Wow. I mean, so yeah, that made its way into the movie, so keep your eye out for that. Errors in geography. Throughout the film, liquor bottles are seen with USA tax revenue stickers across the tops of the bottles. Well, yeah. That is a severe error in geography that, I'm sure in Casablanca, you're not going to have all these USA liquor bottles. At around 47 minutes, the railroad car Rick boards in Paris is an American railroad passenger car. French railroad cars of the time would likely board from multiple doors into individual compartments. The two cars shown reveal that American heritage in handrails, side moldings, and other minor details. Given the unavailability of French cars at the time of filming, the error is understandable. Yeah, it's understandable. Again, the world keeps on spinning. There are things going on that are beyond our control, folks. At around an hour and 35 minutes, when Renault calls Strasser to tell of the upcoming events at the airport, Major Strasser is in the office of the German Commission of Armistice. According to the sign on the door, the name should have been in German or perhaps French, but not in English. Yeah, it makes sense. German Commission of Armistice, it should be in German. It's a German occupation of France, shouldn't have been in English. At around 1 minute, on the map shown during the titles at the beginning, the area where Poland is shown, actually Poland didn't exist in 1942, and it was politically considered part of Germany, or more properly called occupied Poland, is in reality parts of Belarus and the Ukraine, which were dissolved into the USSR at the time. So that's a significant geographical error on the part of the production of the film. In the initial scene with a map of Africa, Rabat is incorrectly placed at the location of the town of Kenitra, and thus is too far north. Rabat is actually about 20 miles further to the southwest at the place where the map indicates a river flowing into the Atlantic. Note that Rabat is correctly placed on the map on the wall in the prefect's office. So that was a geographical error that they actually corrected. So big ups to props department on that one. Make a mistake and then you correct your mistake. On to some plot holes. From the fall of metropolitan France in June 1940 until Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa in 1942, was less than 2 years. During that time, French colonies in Africa were ruled by the Vichy government until each one was either occupied by Free French forces or were conquered by the Allies. I guess that's a major plot hole in the movie. Fall of metropolitan France, 1940, and then Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, 1942. So that whole thing was less than 2 years. Major plot hole. The Nazis never played more than minor role in French North Africa except for Tunisia, and even that was relatively limited during late 1942 to mid-1943, at any time during World War II, and certainly did not run Morocco, much less Casablanca. Historians, feel free to interject. Again, historians listening, feel free to interject. The comment section, it is there. So have at it. Have at it. Comments, whether if it's comment on this particular episode, whether you're listening on like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening from, or on Instagram. The post that I make for this episode when it comes out. Feel free to have at it in the comments section. If Laszlo is such a notorious and hunted character by the Nazis, he would not be so foolish as to openly enter a social and political hub like Rick's Cafe, even in technically free Vichy, Morocco. Very true. Very, very true. With today's modern day technology, the powers that be, I guess that is a bit time period specific, because I feel like 80 years later, like if he were kind of on the run, it's like with all the technology we have today that we didn't have almost a century ago, they would have found him. Like he would have made his way into Morocco. They would have been able to find him in that cafe in like less than 24 hours. At around an hour and 23 minutes, Laszlo wanted to keep his marriage to Ilsa a secret because she would be in danger if the Germans learned she was his wife, and she would know information they would want. But she was openly his traveling companion, which should alert the Germans that she probably knew secret information about Laszlo's work, so her life should be in danger anyway. Yeah, that makes sense. I had actually never thought about that. So good looks to again, the IMDb contributor who gave us that bit of information. There's a boom mic visible. At around an hour and 30 minutes, Rick lets Louis into the cafe to catch Laszlo, and as they walk past the first table, the shadow of the microphone moves across the tabletop. Eagle-eyed viewers notice the shadow of the microphone moving across the tabletop. I don't think I noticed that. Character error. At around 44 minutes, when Rick and Ilsa are listening to the sound of German guns out the window in Paris, Rick comments that they are from the new German 77s. Actually, the German army used a 77mm field gun in World War I, not World War II. Other sources claim that the script change was made from the original 88s on the basis of a War Department request to avoid tipping off the Germans as to America's awareness of the new weapon. Yep, that, I believe it. Again, secrecy, there's a whole war going on. By the time this movie came out in 1942, we were, the United States, we were well apart. We were definitely a part of this war. That was like the first, I guess that was like the first full year of that conflict that we were a part of. So yeah, probably got to be careful about what you do and don't say in a movie, although it's fictional, but At around an hour and 35 minutes in the final airport scene, the French guard telephones the radio tower and reports visibilities 1.5 miles. France invented the metric system in the 1790s and are very chauvinistic about its use. No French official would report distance in miles, only kilometers. I think when I was on the Comic Boys podcast, I talked a bit about the metric system and how for engineers were required to know the international system or the metric system, because that's what the majority of people on the face of the earth know. Here in Micronesia, the mile markers are in miles, not kilometers, and I think for temperature they use Fahrenheit instead of Celsius. That's only because they're a former U.S. territory, but I would say, like, for engineering and for any future engineers, anybody who's thinking about going into STEM, you're going to need to know the international system. Kilometers and not miles. A lot of it just makes sense. A lot of it's easier. So, yeah. But again, having the imperial units, the imperial system is probably the fact that it's an American movie, and who knows, the U.S. may never switch over to the metric system. We might just always be on the imperial system. At around 9 minutes in the opening, Rick is at the back of his cafe playing chess with himself. During a close-up of his hand, he is wearing a wedding ring. Rick is a bachelor. Well, no. Character error. Yeah, that was a character error on the part of Humphrey Bogart. At around an hour and 35 minutes, Rick tells Louis to fill in the letters of transit in the names of Mr. and Mrs. Victor Laszlo. However, the marriage was kept a strict secret, so Ilsa would not have changed her name to Laszlo. She still would have been legally Ilsa Lund. Yep, that's actually, it's absolutely true. You know, the marriage was kept like on the DL. You know, it was like on the DL. You know, like absolutely nobody knew. So yes, you know, for obvious reasons, Ilsa would have kept her maiden name. You know, so legally her name still would have been Ilsa Lund. I think even on IMDb, she's credited as, the character is credited as Ilsa Lund, not as Ilsa Laszlo. So yeah. Lastly, at around 55 minutes, Ferrari's blue parrot is a different species. It is hard to tell in black and white, but based on the face patch, size, and gray scale of the colors, the parrot is a scarlet macaw, red and yellow with blue wing tips, or Ara macaw, and not a blue macaw, hyacinth or blue and gold. So, yeah, eagle-eyed viewers, I think it's even harder to keep track of that in in black and white. But salute to the IMDb contributors. That's it for trivia. On to some quotes. Rick, of all the gin joints and all the towns and all the world, she walks into mine. It's one of the most well-known quotes from this movie. Captain Renault, what in heaven's name brought you to Casablanca? Rick, my health. I came to Casablanca for the waters. Captain Renault, the waters? What waters? What waters? We're in the desert. Rick, I was misinformed. Last line of the movie. Rick, Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Alternate versions. As late as 1974, the references to an extramarital affair were banned in Ireland. The Irish cut got rid of two important sequences. First, after Ilsa tells Rick that she had left him after finding out that Victor was still alive, the embraces and dialogue that followed were cut. Second, the emotional dialogue at the end of the film where Ilsa's line, you're saying that only to make me go, to Rick's line, what I've got to do, you haven't any part of. This led to Irish audiences being bemused by the relationship between Rick and Ilsa, and often interpreting Rick's final speech beginning, I'm not good at being noble, as a reflection of the debilitating effects of war. Wow. Shout out to my Irish listeners in Ireland and around the world. In the Italian version, the sequence where the Italian officer Tonelli meets Strasser is cut. Ciao to my Italiano listeners. Ciao to my Italian listeners. I promise I will review The Godfather at some point. At the time of release, the film was banned in Germany because the story was considered to be anti-Nazi propaganda by the wartime censors. After the end of World War II, the picture was finally released in Germany, but with around 20 minutes of footage cut, all scenes with Major Strasser and all references to Nazism. Other scenes were dubbed so that they had a totally different meaning. Victor Laszlo became Victor Larson, an atomic physicist. In the 70s, the film was redubbed by the ZDF, this time in its uncut form. Guten Morgen to my listeners in Deutschland. Yes, ja. This is why I love, movies like Casablanca, that, like movies that are in like English, French, and German. I get the ability to practice, A colorized version was shown on Australian TV, crikey, and was released on VHS in the United States. There's a colorized version that was shown on Australian TV. Shout out to my listeners down under, especially Lee from Lots Cameron. Shrimp on the barbie. Crikey. All right. I'm having way too much fun, guys. User review. Of all the classics and all the films and all the world, this is the best. This is a film that must belong in every video collection in the US, if not in the world. The stories about its making a legendary form, the constant rewrites to the apocrypha of casting stories. What is amazing to me, and the reason I believe it holds audiences almost spellbound in successive viewings, is the connection with the horrors of World War II was almost every single cast member. Sidney Greenstreet had lost a son in combat, and a number of the cast members fled Europe to escape the ravages of a Hitler regime. Even the evil Nazi character Major Strasser, played with relish by Conrad Veidt, had left Nazi Germany to escape almost sure internment and possible death in a concentration camp. Here was a man who was a legend in German film history as the murdering somnambulists, a possible warning about the Nazi soldiers to come. And because of the vicious anti-Semitism and racism of the Germany of the 30s and 40s, we in America and in Hollywood were given a great film. Everyone in this film is fabulous, but it is the chemistry of Rick Bogart and Ilsa Bergman truly holds the film together. When I saw this film almost frame by frame in the limited book series of classic films that were produced in the late 1960s, I was stunned by the subtlety of facial expressions that convey so much of Rick Blaine's character by a marvelous actor, Humphrey Bogart. There is a reason why he was named the actor of the century. While every person in the film becomes a real flesh and blood presence, the story of Rick and Ilsa is the center of this cinema feast. I must confess that I have seen this picture so many times that I can recite every single line in the movie, to the consternation of my wife, who can't watch it with me anymore. The line that sticks out to me that sticks out the most for me, and which against cheers from New Yorkers whenever it plays in the theater. It is when Bogart says to the Nazis seated at his table, "There are parts of New York I wouldn't advise you to invade." And what makes this line so memorable is that Humphrey Bogart did indeed star in another motion picture from Warner Brothers, where that very thing formed the basis for the script. The movie was All Through the Night. I love this movie too, and I'm not even a New Yorker. There have been many attempts to revisit Casablanca, but only the original makes you really feel what it was like to live through the good war in a faraway place like Casablanca in French Morocco. Even though such trickery as midget airport workers, fog machines, and cardboard cutout airplanes were utilized, this film convinces through its beautiful story with many layers and characters that are so well realized. If you've never seen this movie before, shame on you, and see it immediately. If you only seen it once, I believe you will come back to it more than once. This is just about the most perfect film ever made, and it is a miracle that this is so considering that there were so many hands in the pie. Excuse me for my mixing my metaphors. It's late and I get emotional just thinking about this classic film masterpiece. Play it again and again and again and again. Sam. Thank you, Sam, for giving us that user review on IMDb. Big shout out to Sam. Yeah, this movie is definitely one of the greats. I can see why the AFI put this on their list of top 100 films of all time, why this is in the top 10. Like, I can see not only why this is on the list, but why it's in the top 10. Would I maybe put it higher on the list? Like, I realize it's number 3. Would I put it as number 1? I'm going to say this now, and my answer may change by the end of this series. Who knows? But I would say maybe keep it as number 3. Yep. I would say maybe keep it as number 3. Although I probably would have put The Godfather above Citizen Kane. I probably would have put it as like maybe Godfather, Citizen Kane, and then Casablanca. That would have been my rating. But American Film Institute, they put Citizen Kane as number 1, and then The Godfather as number 2, and Casablanca as number 3. It will always be it is now, I guess, a top 10 movie for me, for sure. It's a movie that I had heard so much about, and now that I've actually watched it, and I've, gotten the real world context behind the film, and it's just an all-around great film. 10 out of 10. For me, 10 out of 10. Yeah, for sure. The IMDb rating for this movie is 8.5 out of 10 stars. It has a Letterboxd score of 4.3 out of 5 stars. I agree with these ratings. Maybe I would have rated it a bit higher for IMDb. Maybe I would have given it like a 9.7 out of 10. And Letterboxd, feel free to follow me on Letterboxd, guys. I'm on Letterboxd, Cobbs Corner Podcast, we're on Letterboxd. Letterboxd score 4.3 out of 5. I might not have a problem with that. Yep, I might not have a problem with that rating. Official details: the movie was released. Its reported release date is January 23rd, 1943. Country of origin: United States. This is an American movie. Official site: apparently there's a Facebook for this movie. The movie is in the languages English, French, German, Italian, and Russian. All 5 of those languages make their way into this film. The movie is also known as Everybody Comes to Rick's. The movie is based on an unproduced play called Everyone Comes to Rick's. Everyone Comes to Rick's, that's the unproduced play that Casablanca is based on. So, the filming locations include Waterman Drive, Van Nuys, Nuys, Los Angeles, California. It's an airport runway, Waterman Drive. The production company was Warner Bros. The movie had about an estimated budget of $950,000. Its gross domestic box office haul was $4.2 million in the U.S. and Canada. Its opening weekend, it made $181,494. Its opening weekend. For some reason, it says April 12th, 1992, even though the movie came out in 1942 or 43. So, its gross worldwide box office was $4.6 million. So the majority of the money that it made at the box office was domestically. That's how you know the movie was great. Really, $4.2 million domestically, and then another $400,000 internationally. Another $400,000 abroad. So, $4.2 million in the gross in U.S. and Canada. $950,000. Accountants, economists, feel free to put in the comments below. Adjust these values for inflation. Plus, you can find all this information on IMDb, so I'm open to those bits of information. To the accountants and finance majors listening, let's adjust for inflation. Inflation calculator? Anyone? Rotten Tomatoes. Rotten Tomatoes gave this movie a score of 99%. Critical score, 99%. Audience score, 95%. I'm siding with the critics on this one, 99%. You know, there's very few movies on Rotten Tomatoes that have 100%. So for Rotten Tomatoes, for them to give it a 99%, I can't complain. Critics' consensus. An undisputed masterpiece and perhaps Hollywood's quintessential statement of love and romance. Casablanca has only improved with age, boasting career-defining performances from Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. For sure. Where to watch? Watch Casablanca with a subscription on Max, rent it on Vudu, Apple TV, Amazon Prime, or buy on Vudu, Apple TV, or Amazon Prime Video. I watched this movie with my subscription to Max. This is probably the first movie I reviewed in a while that I did not watch on DVD. I just watched it with my subscription to Max. So there you have it. That's all for this review of Casablanca, one of the greatest films of all time. Stay tuned for our next episode, which will be Raging Bull, which came out in 1980. That is our next movie on the list. If you like what you heard today, then don't forget to give us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, preferably 5 stars. If you've got a movie or movie series that you want us to review next here on Cobbs Corner, then all you gotta do is hit us up on Instagram or TikTok. You can also, Instagram, TikTok, or Threads. Definitely follow Cobbs Corner on Threads. I'm starting to post more on Threads, so be sure to hit us up on any of those social media accounts. If you don't have social media, you can also email us at cobbscornerpodcast@gmail.com. All that information is in the show notes below. If you made it to the end of this episode, I greatly appreciate it. Be sure to turn on those post notifications so that you get notified when I post, and tune in to Talk Time with Morgan Cobbs Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. Chuk Standard Time, live on YouTube, available everywhere else the next day. I hope you all enjoyed your stay here at Cobbs Corner, and I'll talk to all of you in the next episode. Peace.